Elise Shahi hurried through the hospital's entrance, her arms full of patient files and a steaming coffee precariously balanced in her hand. She was running late, her mind preoccupied with the morning's meeting at the lab. The bustling lobby was filled with the usual chaos, patients, nurses, and visitors weaving around one another like a chaotic dance. As Elise pushed through the glass doors, her shoulder clipped someone coming from the opposite direction. The jolt was enough to upset the balance of her coffee, sending it cascading down the front of a crisp white shirt. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Elise gasped, dropping the files to dig through her bag for napkins. "I wasn't looking where I was." "It's fine," came a calm, amused voice. Elise looked up, her apology caught in her throat. The woman before her was striking, tall, with piercing blue eyes and a sharp jawline softened by a faint, crooked smile. Even with the coffee staining her shirt, she exuded an effortless poise. Here," Elise stammered, finally producing a handful of tissues and pressing them into the woman's hands. "I can pay for the dry cleaning." The woman chuckled, her gaze lingering on Elise a moment too long. "Dry cleaning? That's a bit formal for what seems like fate." Elise blinked, her cheeks warming fate. The woman grinned, dabbing at her shirt. "I mean, what are the odds of getting doused in coffee by someone who looks this good doing it?" Elise's breath hitched, caught between mortification and a thrill of excitement. I'm Elise," she managed, extending a hand, though she immediately realized hers was sticky with coffee. The woman laughed, shaking her head. "Rachel," she said, shaking Elise's clean hand instead. "You owe me a drink, Elise." Elise opened her mouth to respond, but Rachel had already pulled a card from her pocket and scribbled her number on the back. She handed it over with a confident smile. "Text me tonight," Rachel asked, her tone equal parts suggestion and command. Elise nodded, her voice caught somewhere between her throat and her chest. "Okay." Elise had spent the rest of the day with a lightness in her step, her usual precision at the lab occasionally disrupted by thoughts of Rachel's crooked smile and piercing gaze. By the time she texted Rachel after her shift, the anticipation thrummed through her like electricity. When she arrived at the bar Rachel had suggested, Elise was slightly late, having stayed back to finish a report. She spotted Rachel immediately, seated at the corner of the bar with a martini in hand. The fitted black jacket she wore made her look impossibly polished, despite the casual atmosphere. "You made it," Rachel said, as Elise approached, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I was starting to think you stood me up." Elise shrugged, trying to hide her nerves. "Had to make you wait builds character." Rachel grinned, motioning to the bartender. "What are you drinking?" Hours passed as they talked, their conversation flowing effortlessly from light banter to deeper confessions. "I think you might be the most impressive person I've ever spilled coffee on," Rachel said, her tone teasing, but her eyes serious. Elise laughed, her cheeks heating. "And you're the smoothest person to ever flirt with me while covered in coffee." Rachel's gaze lingered, her voice dropping. "I'm only smooth when the person's worth it." Elise's pulse quickened, and before she could respond, Rachel stood and extended a hand. "Dance with me." "I don't really dance," Elise protested, though she took Rachel's hand anyway. "Good," Rachel said, pulling her toward the small dance floor. "Then you'll have to let me lead." Elise couldn't help but laugh, letting Rachel guide her. The music was slow but sultry, the kind that seemed to sync perfectly with their movements. Rachel's hands rested lightly on Elise's waist, and Elise's arms instinctively looped around Rachel's neck. The air between them thickened as they swayed, their bodies brushing just enough to send sparks shooting through Elise's nerves. Rachel leaned closer, her breath warm against Elise's ear. "You're beautiful," she murmured. Elise tilted her head up, her eyes meeting Rachel's. "You're not so bad yourself." The distance between them closed, their lips brushing in a tentative kiss that quickly deepened, the rest of the room falling away. When they finally left the bar, neither of them wanted the night to end. Rachel hailed a cab and gave her address, their hands clasped tightly as they sat close enough to feel the heat radiating between them. Rachel's apartment was sleek and minimalist, the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elise barely had time to take in the view before Rachel pulled her close, her hands cradling Elise's face as their lips met again, hungrier this time. They stumbled toward the couch, their movements a mix of urgency and exploration. Rachel's hands found the buttons of Elise's blouse, her fingers grazing bare skin and sending shivers down Elise's spine. "Are you sure?" Rachel whispered, her voice husky with desire. Elise nodded, her breath catching yes. They moved together in perfect sync, their passion building with each kiss, each touch. It was as if the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only the heat and intensity of their connection. The goodbye. The early morning light filtered through the windows as Rachel's phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. She groaned, reaching for it and frowning as she read the message. "I have to go," Rachel said, her voice heavy with reluctance. Elise stirred, propping herself up on one elbow. "Now."
It had been nearly a year since that night, and Elise had tried and failed to push Rachel from her mind. When she saw her again at the hospital event, the air seemed to vanish from the room. Rachel was with a man, Dietrich, she would later learn, and they looked every bit the perfect couple. Jealousy and hurt flared in Elise, though she tried to suppress it. When they crossed paths in the bathroom, the tension boiled over. "Are you avoiding me?" Rachel asked, leaning against the sink, her tone light but her eyes intense. "Shouldn't you get back to your husband?" Elise shot back, her voice sharp. Rachel blinked, then laughed. A bitter, sardonic sound. "Husband? You think Dietrich is my husband?" "You looked cozy," Elise retorted, crossing her arms. Elise crossed her arms, her voice colder than she intended. "You looked cozy?" Rachel stepped closer, her gaze sharp. "Dietrich is my best friend, Elise. Not my husband. I'm gay. You should know that after." She let the words hang, her eyes raking over Elise in a way that made her skin prickle. Elise's lips parted slightly, caught between surprise and embarrassment. "Oh, yeah, oh," Rachel repeated, her tone cutting, but her eyes softening slightly. "And since we're clarifying things, why are you giving me the cold shoulder?" Elise's jaw tightened. "You didn't call. I was overseas," Rachel said, her voice rising slightly, "and I didn't think you wanted me to." Elise let out a humorless laugh. "How considerate." Rachel ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. "You want to get out of here?" "No," Elise said firmly, crossing her arms tighter. "Not interested." Rachel tilted her head, studying Elise with a knowing smile that made her pulse quicken. "That's not what you said last time." "That was 6 months ago," Elise snapped. "Times have changed." Rachel's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of hurt. "Oh well, your loss," she turned abruptly, muttering under her breath. What a nerve, as she pushed the door open and disappeared. Elise stepped out of the restroom moments later, her heart still racing from the confrontation. Catherine Woods, Jonathan's wife, was waiting near the corridor, her face lighting up as she spotted Elise. "Ah, there you are," Catherine said warmly. "I've been looking for you." Elise forced a smile, trying to steady her breathing. "Is everything all right?" Catherine nodded, her enthusiasm undimmed. "Yes, I just wanted to introduce you to my eldest. Rachel has been overseas, but she's back for a few days, and I thought you two might hit it off." Elise blinked, her composure slipping. "Rachel?" Catherine's brow furrowed. "Yes, I thought I mentioned her before." She glanced around the room, searching. "Now, where did she go? Oh, I've missed her, haven't I?" Elise barely managed a nod, her mind spinning. Catherine's voice faded into the background as the realization settled in. It had been nearly a year since that night, and Elise had tried and failed to push Rachel from her mind. When she saw her again, Elise took a steadying breath before pushing open the door to Allison's hospital room. She had reviewed the case thoroughly and felt confident in the treatment plan. Inside, Rachel sat by Allison's bedside, holding her friend's hand gently, her thumb brushing over knuckles pale with strain. Allison's eyes fluttered open briefly, and she gave Elise a faint smile before succumbing again to the haze of her medication. "Good morning," Elise said softly, stepping into the room with her clipboard. Her professional tone masked the turmoil inside her. Rachel looked up sharply, her eyes widening in surprise. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "Elise," Rachel said, her voice catching slightly as she glanced up. "You're Dr. Shahi." Elise blinked, her composure cracking for a brief moment before she nodded curtly. "Miss Woods." Her gaze flickered to Dietrich, who stood at the foot of the bed. His expression was warm but lined with worry as he extended a hand. "Dr. Shahi, thank you for seeing Allison on such short notice." "Of course," Elise replied, shaking his hand. "Let's focus on getting her the care she needs." Elise turned her attention to Allison, her clinical instincts taking over as she reviewed the chart. "Allison, how are you feeling today?" Allison managed a faint smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tired, but grateful to be here." Elise nodded, her tone gentle. "We'll do everything we can to help." As Elise continued her examination, she couldn't help but feel Rachel's eyes on her. The weight of their shared history pressing against the sterile walls of the room, she resisted the urge to meet her gaze, focusing instead on the task at hand. After the examination, Dietrich stepped out to take a call, leaving Rachel and Elise alone in the room with Allison. The silence was thick, the only sound the faint beeping of the monitors. Rachel broke it first. "She's lucky to have you as her doctor." Elise glanced up, her expression guarded. "I'm just doing my job." Elise exhaled sharply, setting the clipboard down on the bedside table. "Look, Rachel, whatever this is, whatever happened between us, it doesn't matter right now. Allison's health is the priority." Rachel turned then, her gaze piercing. "You think I don't know that?" "I don't know what you know," Elise shot back, her voice rising before she caught herself. She glanced at Allison, who had drifted to sleep, then lowered her tone. "I'm here for her, that's all." Rachel's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she nodded curtly and walked to the door. "Thank you, Dr. Shahi." As Rachel left, Elise let out a breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding the door clicked shut, leaving her alone with the sleeping patient and a storm of unresolved emotions.
The tension between them was palpable as they sat down at a corner table, far from the hum of hospital staff and visitors. Rachel ordered a coffee, her fingers drumming softly against the table's surface. Elise clasped her hands together, feeling the weight of Rachel's gaze on her. "I didn't know you were working with my father," Rachel began, her voice low but steady. "I didn't know you were his daughter," Elise replied, her words sharper than intended. She softened. It was surprising, to say the least. Rachel let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Surprising doesn't even begin to cover it. There was a silence, heavy but not empty. Elise finally broke it. "You've been avoiding me." Rachel met her eyes, her expression unreadable. It wasn't intentional. Elise arched an eyebrow. "Really? You disappear after that night? No calls, no texts, and then I see you at the hospital with..." She gestured vaguely, unable to hide the edge in her voice. Rachel leaned forward, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Elise, Dietrich is not my husband, he's my best friend, and Allison, his wife, is like family. She's sick, I'm here for them, nothing more." Elise blinked, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "You could have told me." Rachel sighed. "I didn't know how, after that night. I didn't know if you wanted to hear from me." Elise leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You didn't even try." "That's fair," Rachel admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. "But it wasn't because I didn't care, I didn't want to complicate your life." "Rachel," Elise said, leaning forward now, her voice barely above a whisper, "you were the first person in a long time who made me feel alive, and then you vanished." The words hung between them, raw and unfiltered. Rachel swallowed hard, her throat tightening as she absorbed Elise's vulnerability. "I didn't think I deserved to feel that way," Rachel confessed. "With the life I lead, people like me don't get to have someone like you." Elise's eyes softened, and she reached across the table, her fingers brushing against Rachel's. "Maybe you should let me decide what I can handle." The spark rekindled. Rachel's breath caught at the touch, the warmth of Elise's fingers igniting something she had tried to suppress. She turned her hand over, their palms meeting in a tentative yet deliberate gesture. "Elise," Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've thought about you every day since that night, but I didn't want to drag you into my chaos. My life isn't simple." "I don't need simple," Elise said firmly. "I need real." For the first time in months, Rachel allowed herself to smile, a small, hesitant curve of her lips that held more promise than any words could. "What are you doing tonight?" Rachel asked, her tone lighter, almost playful. Elise's lips quirked into a smile of her own. "Why don't you tell me?"